The most important data integration system in your company is probably not a system. It's actually a meeting. I worked with a pharma company years ago that ran a monthly meeting to review drug targets. Biologists brought the target evidence, chemists brought the molecule, translational scientists argued about whether any of it will survive contact with a patient, safety, clinical manufacturing, commercial. Everyone showed up with their own data and their own reading of that data. And in that room for 2 hours, all of it got integrated, not by a platform, by the people sitting around the table. At the end, the group decided something real, continue this program, kill that one, change the molecule, switch the indication, move the money somewhere else. That meeting was the integration engine. And I will bet most of what happened inside is now gone. We talk about data silos as if the problem is that information sits in different databases and never comes together. But it does come together. It comes together in these meetings all the time. The integration happens. What we lose is what happened after everyone stood up and left the room. The decision gets logged, option B, the action items make it into the minutes, a slide somewhere records that the team went with option B. What almost never survives is why option B? Which piece of evidence actually moved the room? Which assumptions the whole thing was resting on? What got rejected? And who was unhappy about it? And the question that matters most later, what will have to change for us to reopen this? In most organizations, all of that lived in the head of the people who were there. Someone at a large pharma told me the following story. They had an early discovery program carrying signals that, on the science, said the program should stop. In the meetings, most of the scientists knew it. They spent those meetings wondering aloud to each other why the thing was still alive. And it stayed alive anyway, for the reason these things usually do: politics, pressure, someone senior whose reputation was attached to it, personal ambition. We work in the most scientific industry, and a surprising amount of what moves the program is not really scientific at all. Sometimes a program that should die keeps going. Sometimes, just as bad, one that should continue gets killed for the same non-scientific reason. You can always tell when none of the reasons are scientific because that's when someone says the decision was made, quote unquote, for strategic reasons. That program went all the way to a late clinical phase, and of course it failed. It made headlines, the company lost billions in market value more or less overnight. On a result, a room full of scientists had half predicted a few years earlier. Here's the part that matters for this piece. The failure was expensive, but the deeper loss was that nobody could point to where the reasoning had gone wrong, because the reasoning was never really captured. Which evidence got cherry-picked to keep it alive? Which real concerns were raised but waved away, and by whom? None of it was written down in a form anyone could go back to, so the organization couldn't even learn from a billion-dollar mistake, because the trail of how it decided had completely evaporated. So that's not really a rare story. It is what happens over and over in large organizations, not just pharma, when we let the decision walk out of the room with the people who made it. You can survive that in an industry with short memory cycles. Pharma is the opposite. A program can run for more than a decade. Over 10 years, the team turns over completely. Leaders move on, the scientists who understood exactly why you deprioritize that target takes a job at a competitor, and then 18 months or 5 years later, someone asks the question, why did we drop this? The experimental data is still here if you can find it. The deck is still here. The recorded decision might even still there somewhere in someone's inbox. What's gone is the wiring between them, the reasoning that turned that evidence into that choice. This is the part I find hardest to sit with. It's the cost of an organization not knowing what it already knows, and that's a worse failure than not knowing what you don't know, because the answer was in the building the whole time. Now, hold that next to what pharma has actually invested in. We have spent 20 years and enormous amounts of money on data provenance. Where did this result come from? Which sample, which protocol, which instrument, which version of the analysis was approved, by whom, and what date? We industrialize the traceability of evidence. At least we tried to. We have spent almost nothing on decision provenance. How did this evidence become this choice? That's the gap. Not another database of results, the trace that connects the evidence to the human judgment. I wrote about a bigger version of this in a piece that I called 10x Pharma, and what I call the organizational brain. I'll put the link in the comments below. The short version is that this memory problem isn't a filing problem, it's the flow problem, stated directly, whether the right information reaches the right person at the right time. Most of what we call institutional knowledge today isn't memory at all. It lives in PowerPoint. Nobody reopens. And a SharePoint. Everyone hopes someone else will make sense of. That isn't really memory, it's more something like sedimentation. There's a reason this is worthy effort. And it's not just archaeology. If you keep only the outcome and lose the reasoning, you can't tell the difference between a bad decision and a bad outcome. A good decision made responsibly with the evidence available at the time can still fail. That's drug development. That's our industry. And a weak decision can't get lucky. If all you have to record is what happened, you will reward the lucky call and punish the sound one, and you will learn precisely the wrong lesson from both. Preserving the reasoning is what lets an organization learn from its own failure instead of just cataloging it. The program I just described is the case in point. The outcome was a failure, but the decision to keep it alive was the real one worth studying. And that's exactly the thing nobody could reconstruct. So why talk about this now when the complaint itself is that old and everyone knows about it? Because one thing changed. Meetings are recorded and transcribed. Email and chat are already digital. The documents people argued over already exist somewhere in the system. For the first time, most of the human reasoning around the decision is actually machine-readable. The important was never new. The readability is. That does not mean you record everything and hand it to an AI. A transcript is not a record of the truth. It's full of errors, half-finished sentences, politics, and the occasional joke that should never enter the permanent scientific record. The software world already learned a version of this. In 2011, Michael Nygaard proposed the architecture decision record, a short note capturing a single decision that forces behind it and its consequences, kept next to the work so that when the team changes, nobody is left, in his word, wondering what were they thinking. Engineers adopted it because they kept losing the reasoning behind their own system. Pharma is the same disease in a domain where the decision cost a decade and $1 billion, and where the reasoning is buried in a conversation, not a code commit. The right model isn't automation. AI proposes a structured decision record. Here is the decision, the alternatives, the evidence, versions, the dissent, the conditions to revisit. Then the person accountable for the decision confirms it, corrects it, or throws it out. Machine drafts, human signs. And there is a market forming around exactly this. Companies like Biobox or Perceptic are building it from opposite ends. One turning a team-owned experimental record into something queryable instead of something that rots in a folder. The other laying a connective layer across the pipeline, so a finding in early discovery is still legible to the team deciding 3 stages and 2 years later. The answer isn't to capture everything, it's to make capturing the reasoning almost free, so it happens as a byproduct of the work rather than a tax on top of it. I wrote that byproduct nor surveillance line a few months ago. I still believe it. What I did not fully see then is the risk sitting right next to it. And I want to tell you why. Watch what's already happening to how we work. I barely type anymore. I dictate almost everything across languages, switching mid-sentences, and the transcription is good, really good. Actually, it's good enough that I rarely correct it. Even the names, the friction that used to keep our speech private, the effort of turning talk into text is basically gone. Voice is becoming as capturable as a keystroke. So follow that forward. If every conversation can be transcribed perfectly, structured, automatically, and linked to the decision it produced at essentially zero cost, well, the cost of the model that you're using, which is not really zero, then the reason we don't capture everything stops being technical. It becomes a choice. And the argument for capturing all of it is going to be made in the language of a greater good. Not we want to watch you, instead, we do this because it makes the organization smarter. It makes you more effective. We already have a case studies, and they landed after I published that original article that I mentioned before. The first is actually a failure. In April 2026, Meta pushed software to its US employees' laptops that capture keystrokes, mouse movement, and screen content, a program it called the Model Capability Initiative. The stated purpose was not punishment, it was to teach AI agents how skilled people actually worked, framed at building better tools. More than 1,600 employees signed a petition to kill it, and then the collected data, private messages, performance information turned out to be accessible across thousands of internal tables, and Meta paused the program. The second is more telling because there was no backlash to speak of. In August 2026, Sam Altman described in an interview a near-future ChatGPT that will watch your screen all the time, record every meeting and every call, and hold what he called perfect context of your whole life. His word for it was that we are one model generation away from this being incredibly useful. So think about how casual that was said and how little anyone thought about at that time. So there was a post from a lawyer on LinkedIn that I follow, and he made the point obvious to everyone. The moment your assistant records a meeting, it records the 5 other people in the room who never really agreed to anything. This is the enterprise memory problem I've been describing, turned into a consumer product and sold as a convenience. And the striking part is not that someone proposed it, it is that it barely registered as strange. So here is where I've updated. What used to stop us from capturing everything was cost, the sheer effort of it. The barrier is collapsing. What has to stop us now is a choice, a deliberate line, because the technology no longer draws it for us. And the thing you're protecting when you draw that line isn't the right to hide wrongdoing. It's the half-formed thought, the idea you say out loud to test whether it's stupid, the disagreement you voice and then withdraw, the space to be wrong without becoming part of your permanent record. That space is where a lot of actual science happens. It's also the first thing a total capturing system removes, not by banning it, but by making it the one thing conspicuously off the record. I'm not recommending this. I don't want to work in a company or live in a world that listens to everything, even one that means well. But I've stopped being sure that what stops us getting there is principle rather than cost, and the cost is collapsing. The most powerful people building this describe total capture as a feature in a flat voice, and most of us just nod. That is the part that should worry us, not that someone is building the surveillance, but that we are being taught to find it absolutely normal. For decades, we worked to make experimental data traceable, and we were right to. The next layer is the reasoning, how the evidence became the decision. I think we should build it. However, I'm no longer certain that we will know where to stop or that we will want to stop. And the reason we'll keep going won't be that someone forced us. It will be that it got easy, that someone told us that it was for our own good and that we had already stopped finding it strange.